this is where I am perfectly happy if I get proven wrong. If someone comes out with a paper and it describes all the processes in the brain and how this equates to our belief of choice, I will happily accept that.
Right. Yeah.
Because, as I said earlier, I personally care more about how I choose to view it than the actual fact.
Hello and welcome to Beyond B, the show where mechanical engineering students go beyond ME, and where the things we talk about are beyond us. I'm Ben Jacobson, here with my co-hosts Liam Bennett.
What's up?
And Finian Richardson.
Hey, how's it going? Today we're joined with Brendan Gell, and all four of us talked about whether or not we individually, scientifically think we have free will and the implications in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends and family.
Let's get into it.
Well, hello, Brendan. How's it going?
Good. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. To begin with, would you just like to tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a second-year mechanical engineering student here at RIT. I am pretty involved with the formula team here, and I'd say I have a fair amount of interest in business and philosophy, which will be a topic that we're discussing here today.
Yeah, philosophy
nice.
Definitely going to be a big topic today.
Yeah, big topic.
I hope so.
Actually, when Liam and I first discussed starting a podcast, this was April of 2024, the conversation that brought that up was free will. We were talking in this stairwell of a hotel about free will, recorded on voice memos, and we said, let's make a podcast. Now, in episode 13, we are finally getting into free will, and I'm pumped.
Yeah, everything else is just practice.
Right.
Yeah.
This
This
is
the real one.
This is like the culmination. But yeah. Yeah, so free will. I want to give a little bit of a quick overview for us and for the audience. Did some research last night, so we're all on the same page. Basically, for those who don't know, free will is essentially the ability to choose between different possible courses of action. That's according to Wikipedia, and that's basically just saying free will is, do humans have a choice? Can they choose to do things? Do they have choice? And so one related idea to free will is the idea of determinism, which essentially says that, everything in the world just obeys the laws of physics, and therefore there only can be one possible outcome and everything is just determined by the laws of physics, right? And so there are two main camps of free will. There are the incompatibilists and the compatibilists. So the incompatibilists say that determinism and free will cannot coexist. So the hard determinists say that this is now a subset of incompatibilism. The hard determinists say, okay, determinism is true, therefore free will cannot exist. Okay? And then you have on the other side, you have the metaphysical libertarians who say that free will free will is true, therefore determinism cannot exist. Okay? So those are the two camps of the incompatibilists. The two main.
You really did do your research.
Dude, I don't mess
put all
around.
these vague ideas, and you've actually put them in camps.
I love it.
Yeah. Okay. Very
So then
nice.
you have the compatibilists who say, no, free will and determinism can coexist together. So I mean, we can unpack that more, but that's the essential idea that no, like these two things can be true at the same time. Okay.
Brendan, how do you feel about these? Where do you stand?
There's one more.
Okay.
One more that
Is there another camp?
There's a little bonus camp
Okay.
that I want to
Bonus
bring
camp.
up. Bonus camp.
Summer camp.
So then you have the hard incompatibilists who say,
Oh, that's
okay,
me.
no. Free will cannot exist whether or not determinism exists. So if determinism exists and everything's governed by the laws of nature, free will cannot exist. Or if there is no determinism because there are quantum effects and there's randomness and all these things, it doesn't matter because that doesn't imply free will because it's random. That's the general idea. So laid it all out, or it laid out the main camps. Brendan, what are your initial thoughts? What do you think?
So I'd say, honestly, from the start, I'm coming in with almost a compatibilist kind of, and this is due to, I'd say, how vague I find a lot of these definitions.
Yeah.
It's the specific scope of determinism is why I'm willing to associate that as it being able to exist in the same space as free will. Because yes, they are kind of antithetical to each other, but that depends on how you define them in this specific breadth of control that like determinism has, whether it's like literally every single event is preordained or if there's just a general flow of what occurs. I think you can balance those pretty well depending on where you choose to place your bets.
Well, I think this gets to another really important thing. Is I think we actually really need to define what free will is. Like, I think outside of determinism, all these things, I think free will just on its own has a definition, and I think it's really hard to figure out what that definition is.
Okay.
And I think that's a good starting point. So I like one definition is that free will is somehow that the mind has the ability to make choices
Right.
independent of either physical processes or independent of this is part of the reason I find this conversation simpler than I think most, because I don't know how to define free will from that standpoint. I don't think there's a logical way to define free will.
Interesting. So like you don't actually think that, well, not think, but you don't know exactly what the definition of free will would be because you don't.
It just doesn't make logical sense to me.
Okay.
This is okay. So
You're considering yourself a compatibilist. Does that
Yes.
imply that you think there's a possibility that free will exists?
Yes.
What is that? What is that?
I would say that free will is it's kind of the ability to choose and navigate a path. And it does kind of vary if you get into the biological choices, because there is significant influence from, you know, a lot of the different chemicals in the brain, all the different like receptors, everything's interacting, bouncing back and forth. You've got the stimuli. But I think there is a degree of interaction in how there are so many different, there's all these different systems combining together. And I just think there's a way that I'd put it that I was thinking about before coming here is that it's like a kind of a belief that I'd say I have is that like humans are like innately hypocritical. And I think that is kind of an integral part of this free will, is that it's like it's the ability to kind of do things that aren't always the logical, rational thing to do, yet at the same time not necessarily the most compassionate thing. And I just think that weird balance kind of seems to lean towards a free will. And even if that is purely biological, there's a degree of, I don't have the right word for it, but there's just something kind of that I see special about that leans towards this kind of metaphysical free will.
Yeah, would you? What do you mean by that exactly? The metaphysical free will.
Well, I mean,
What would that look like?
just treating free will as an idea is the way that I'm putting it, like as this kind of concept of free will, because it is hard to define. We don't know everything about how the brain functions, the existence of like what the human consciousness is versus the computer that is our brain.
Yeah.
I guess I still see it as I think you can trace as far back to this idea as free will as you want. Like you can take out a lot of the physical stuff. You can make it purely philosophical. I don't feel like it has a lot of meaning, because I feel like whether or not like you can make the point that we're hypocritical or we don't act always in compassion or we don't always act even logically, but we're still acting for a reason. I don't think there's any choices you make that are for a lack of reason. And I think that. So I like that reasoning basis for every decision. I think right there shows you like, okay, if we're doing things because of reason, where does free will fit in? Where there just doesn't seem to be any room for something that you could define as free will.
Well, like the way that I look at it is I do think there's free will, but I think that it's not based on whether or not it will or won't happen. It's based on like a probability. Like we talk about people, they're most likely to do this. Because like if you think about like the randomness of the universe at like a really base level, you can only probabilistically. Okay. Yeah, sure.
We'll accept it.
Yeah, we'll accept that pronunciation of the word. you can only probabilistically like say that something's going to happen. If you take all the particles in the universe and try and calculate what they're going to do, you would have like almost infinite computing power, which you would need, which is not possible, essentially. So if you try and optimize that, then you're going to be using probability instead of hard calculation.
I have many thoughts on this.
Okay.
So I've been toying with the idea of determinism for a little bit. And so essentially, like, Newtonian determinism is like, this was sort of like believed a while ago. I believe that it's since been disproven from quantum mechanics, but it essentially says, okay, everything obeys Newton's laws of motion, which we now know is not true. But it's like if you could take, every particle in the universe and just simulate what it would do, and let's just say you had infinite computing power, you had infinite resources, all of these things, right? This is a very theoretical thing. This is not possible. But if you could simulate every particle interaction at infinitesimally small timescales and do that forever, and from the Big Bang till now, everything will be determined, right? And that idea is called Laplace's demon. That was from the mathematician Laplace, I believe. And that's the idea that, like, this is before they had computers, so they're like, okay, there's like the demon called Laplace's demon that can predict the future. That's what this idea is, that everything's determined. But like, you have quantum effects. So like, and that what that boils down to is like, instead of being able to pinpoint, okay, the electron like of an atom is here.
Yeah.
We can't we can't say definitively where it is. We can say, like what you said, probabilistically, we can assign probabilities to where we think
electron clouds.
Exactly, right? So that idea alone, in my mind at least, kind of shuts down the idea of like complete physical determinism. But going with the incompatibilist view, that doesn't matter, at least the incompatibilist view that doesn't matter, because even if there are random effects, that doesn't imply free will. That doesn't right make room for free will, because even if it's not determined, it's still random. There's no choice.
There's always that piece of it, like you can say, okay, there's randomness. Okay, there probably is randomness. How does free will come out of randomness? What effect does that have? Why is that useful to define randomness as being some kind of free will?
Right.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the main thing that I would say, kind of counter to Liam, is that I think the major difference that I've kind of seen from the discussion is you take like a purely secular view to determinism, whereas like I kind of take a bit more of the spiritual in kind of the presence of like a consciousness, and it's like what is the mind and the ability to choose, because you're viewing it in, obviously, as soon as you go spiritual, everything's purely hand wavy, but I think as soon as you escape the bounds of like what we know of science, then free will is entirely possible if you believe that there is the existence of some mind, some entity controlling the flesh robot that we are.
Right.
Ooh, I think I disagree with that again, because I think, okay, let's say there's some metaphysical spirit controlling or giving some level of advice to you.
Yeah.
Where's the free will in that? Why does that thing make decisions?
Well,
No. You would be the spirit.
No,
I'm not a marionette.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, why does your spirit make decisions?
Because it can.
But why does it make the decision? What's the difference between a spirit making decisions or a physical process in your mind, like as far as the free will conversation goes? And I have another way of defining it, actually, now that I'm thinking of it. The takeaways that I have from free will, and generally my lack of thinking that it exists, gives the ability to look at society in general. Like the way I look at it, like, okay, you have a bunch of people. People can do good and bad things. Society says, okay, you kill someone. That's a bad thing. Now there's a few things you can do about that. You can punish them because you want them to suffer, or you can punish them because you think it's better for society. It helps society run better. And I would argue that when you strip the making someone suffer piece out of it, you're left with something that works with the idea of there not being free will more. Because if, like, okay, for me, for example, if I think about someone suffering because they did something, I'm coming from the basis that I feel like people's decisions are all basically decided by their circumstances. So why would I want someone to suffer for hurting someone? I want to reduce suffering in general. So I want them to go to jail because I think that helps society and it prevents them from having other people suffer. And maybe there's a reform aspect in jail. But as far as like, if you think there's free will, then I can see it logical that you'd think you'd want someone to suffer for doing something bad because their soul has done something bad, and you want you want like them to repent or something. And that's where I think the conversation actually bears fruit of having actual effect, and it actually matters in the real world. So I don't know, that's what when I define free will, that's why I can't find a definition that works, because I can't find a definition of free will that could work that would make it so that someone doing something bad should result in them suffering. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I can elaborate on that more.
Here's a problem that I have with that argument, though.
Sure.
If you take that and like that mindset and apply it to the justice system, you're then saying that the people are essentially captive of like their actions. So if someone kills someone else, they didn't make that choice. They were essentially led there by everything else in their life. So why is it just to imprison them for killing that person if they're captive by their actions?
No, I don't see it that way at all. You're just saying, okay, everything's captive in action. Let's say a computer glitches or breaks or something and it stops working the way it should.
Yeah.
You're not going to keep it running because you're going to be like, well, the computer didn't say it's just a computer. Like you're not punishing the computer by throwing it out. You're just saying, okay, just doesn't work anymore. So I see the same thing as that. I see that for jail. I see it as like, okay, you don't like punishment for me is just like, okay, you want society to work better, and you've decided this person they don't work well in society, and so they lose their right to get to be in society, and they have to go to jail.
But the essence of a right is founded in the idea that people do have free will. Do you see what I'm saying? Like you have the right to be able to do these things, to be able to make these choices. And
I think for a lot of things, I think the pretending as though we have free will actually helps society work better, because we can assign intent to things. And assigning intent to something like murder or something like first degree, second degree, assigning, okay, did you want to do it, helps us determine how much of a risk you are to society. And so I think that's why we do it. But I think you can strip that. I think you can separate it. I think you can say, okay, you're more of a risk to society because you wanted to do that, but you still don't have free will, so I don't want you to suffer for it. I just want you to be removed from society because I think that's going to help society.
Is that not making them suffer? I mean, if you send somebody to jail, even if it's to remove them from society, now they're by themselves away from their family. That's still making them suffer, is it not?
Well, if that's required for them to be out of society, then that's the way it is. I'd still rather them be out of society, but I'm not coming from the basis of I want them to suffer, therefore I'm going to put them in jail. I'm coming from the basis of I want them to be out of society, therefore in jail. They're in jail. If they're suffering, that's incidental. In this case, I mean, it's unfortunate. Yeah, it's.
So okay. I think that there are a lot of things to say in terms of how society, what society is built on now, and how it would need to change, with free will, without free will. I think that these can be separate conversations in the sense that one conversation can be, okay, what do we all think about free will from like either a scientific or like spiritual standpoint, where, do we all think it does or doesn't exist, or maybe somewhere in between? We can treat that separately from, okay, now if it does or doesn't, what are the societal implications?
I disagree with that. No, I think it's so hard to define free will that you have to consider the implications when talking about it. That's why I bring it up.
Okay.
I think it's
So you're
so
saying-
difficult to properly define that I think you need the implications of what it actually
Interesting.
means to help frame it and then bring that back to the conversation itself.
Okay.
Okay.
But
And
You
but
seem
yeah,
like
what do
you
you feel
want
about
to
that?
talk about
Yeah, and this is where I was going to jump in, and I think with my definition of free will, I would actually base it in the complete opposite manner and say that you should take almost a selfish standpoint and just think about who you are, how you navigate your life, the ramifications of your choices on the people that you know, on what you experience, what brings you to where you are. And I think that's kind of the answer that I've sought and found is through like the different interactions and experiences that I've had. Just all of the things that I've been able to do throughout my life, I don't think I would have been able to do without the choice to take certain actions. Because even if we get into just simple things like anxiety, there are, I think there are times where I've done things where it's like my body feels like it's shutting down from the nervousness. Like I'm physically struggling to make this choice, but then I do. And I just feel like there's a degree of that's what I classify free will is that it's the ability to sometimes make these hard choices that don't feel natural, that you wouldn't instinctively go towards. It's that kind of the tenacity and this ability to be divergent.
So I think you can look at that and you could say, okay, some decisions are made outside of logic as we're aware of them, like intuitive decisions. Like we had two good options here, two bad options, and I had to pick one, and I was able to pick one. And after I picked it, it just felt right. The intuition there. I would still argue there's just no room for free will there. Like on some level, your mind made that decision.
So you're saying intuition is sort of like your mind nudging you towards
I think it's deeper levels of thinking.
predetermined answer.
I don't think you need to use the word predetermined. I think
Okay.
it's like, okay, let's say your mind made the decision. Intuition to me seems like your subconscious has information that your conscious isn't aware of, and so it's helping you make a decision. That's what I think of as intuition.
Okay.
Let's say intuition is metaphysical. Let's say intuition is actually your brain is communicating with other brains in ways we don't know. That's just a theory people have. I don't know if that's true. It's probably not true. I don't know. I don't think it matters there because I think it's either way. It's your brain is taking in information and making decisions, whether or not you, whatever conscious you is aware of it. It's still making, like I just, like in all these things, like you can even put it in a box and you can say, oh, there's a bunch of fuzzy, weird stuff happening in here. Like I make a decision, I was anxious and I end up making a decision anyway. I still don't see room for free will. Like even if we don't know entirely what's going on there, I don't know how you can take any absence of our understanding and look in and find free will.
The one thing I have to say is that, yes, I would say you made a very logical argument about the intuitive, but what about the counterintuitive? What about the time when you make decisions that don't make sense? They don't make sense in the moment. They don't make sense afterwards. You don't feel any sense of intuition. You didn't feel good about either answer. You make a decision that might even seem like the worst decision in the moment. You might not be comfortable with it. You might be at risk. You might be sacrificing something very important to you. But this is the decision that for some reason or another might not have felt right. No signs any way point towards this answer, but this is still the one that you choose.
When do you do that?
I don't have a great example, but I know that I have done things like this.
When you
because
procrastinate.
When you procrastinate.
I can logically explain why I procrastinate.
Because you don't want to do the work.
Because I just don't want to do it. I'm lazy.
No, but you know that you should.
Yeah, but I know that I'll
And
nine
you have
times
the,
out of
you have
times
the,
out of 10 I'll be fine if I don't do it.
you
Like
have
if I do
the
it,
feeling that you should do it. You have that intuition that, oh, this is what I should be doing, which is what you just argued.
Yeah, and then I
But-
can logically in my head be like, well, I can just watch TV for another 10 minutes.
But wouldn't
It'll
that be
actually
free
work out
will?
fine.
You take the choice
Yeah.
to do something that
That's
is
true.
counter.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You kind of just you said in my head. You said in my head I can just.
Yeah, I can logically work out why I can
So
just not do
when
the
you
thing
say
right now.
work out, what does that mean? Like, are you working
Making
out a
a choice.
decision
It's like
or
a calculation.
Yeah, like expand on that.
that I think that gets to whatever consciousness is, and I think consciousness is kind of the illusion that you're working on things.
Okay.
Like for example, okay, this is a good one. All right, Brendan, so you're the guest. Give me a movie.
Back to the Future.
Oh, okay.
Great. Why did you say Back to the Future?
Wait a minute.
No,
Oh,
I do
Because
have a thing I want to talk about with Back to the Future.
So in the subconscious, because Finian mentioned it on Friday.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
So is that free will?
What do you mean?
Was there any free will in
Yeah.
deciding Back to the Future?
Yes,
Interesting.
because
And
it
so-
came to me, but I didn't have to say it.
You didn't have to say it.
Just because it's the first thing that came to me doesn't mean that I had to choose that.
Well,
I
what-
could have derailed the stream of consciousness. I could have paused, said, I don't think that's an apt choice, and changed my mind.
So maybe two movies could have come up and you had the choice between them.
Oh, Apocalypse Now.
Okay, so you had the choice between
Or
Back
just-
to the Future and Apocalypse Now. You made a decision. Why did you make the decision?
It felt more natural.
Felt more natural.
Go with the flow.
And so that's free will.
Yes.
So you think your brain, do you think one of them was more logical than the other? Like, do you think Back to the Future was more relevant in this case?
I don't think I'm that calculative.
Okay, so you just felt it.
I flowed. It was easier to go with the stream than resist
Mm-hmm.
it. At times, that is the more natural decision. There was no, evident harm. There's no great benefit. I might as well go with what, came to me intuitively.
I just don't see how intuition inserts free will into that. I just intuition can guide you in one direction, but that's just coming from somewhere deep in your mind you're not aware of. I just don't know where the free will is in that.
The ability to resist.
Okay, two things. First,
Ability to
we'll
resist
we'll
what?
come back to Back to the Future in a
Yeah,
second.
yeah.
This is kind of reminding me of an argument that I had with my dad about what is art?
Mhm.
At what point does something become art? Because I can look at this wall, it's painted, but I wouldn't call it art. What I can go to a gallery, see a canvas that's painted the exact same color,
Still not art.
and then it's art. But it's in a
It's money
museum, it's
laundering.
classified as art.
Yeah.
So where's the line? This is reminding
There
me.
is no line.
Intent.
This
Yeah,
is
there's no line.
this
Oh,
is reminding me of that conversation because your whole thing was you said Back to the Future. Why? Because you wanted to. The act of doing it is what made it a choice. So the act of putting it on a canvas is what made it art. Do you see what I'm saying?
I completely agree. That's why I said
Yeah.
intent. It's the purpose.
Okay.
Yeah. So coming back to Back to the Future, without thinking about the temporal mechanics of it, do you agree with the time travel in Back to the Future?
No.
No. Okay. Liam, do you?
I don't have thoughts.
No, but do you think that the time travel in Back to the Future is realistic? If someone
No, I
was,
think everything gets screwed up when you do time travel.
okay,
I,
what do you think?
No.
Okay.
do you want to give an overview for the audience? Just a very basic
Okay.
what happened?
Now that everyone's answered, I wanted to have everyone answer before
Okay.
I explain it
Okay.
because it will sort of tip off.
Okay.
So in Back to the Future, Marty McFly goes back in time and then disrupts his parents from meeting, and that leads to him disappearing
Uh-huh.
or start to
In the
disappear.
photograph.
In the photograph, and in real life, there's that scene
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the gym, whatever. But if you disagree, that means that you think there is free will. Because if him disrupting the timeline, essentially means that he was never born, that means that everything was predetermined.
Wait, say that again?
So the act of him going back in time, being there, has disrupted things, means that there was already a flow of time that was going to occur and will have always occurred. It was predetermined. But him
Okay.
going back changed that.
Yeah, but that's also
you're
going back
also-
in time. That
you're
just
adding rules.
breaking,
Yeah,
you're breaking the laws of physics.
You're defining it a certain way and saying,
No.
therefore, there's free will. I think the whole thing doesn't make sense, so I don't know how you can do that.
From the theory, I'm not saying that it's a perfect representation, but as an example of how we think of that time travel and how it makes sense in your brain is an indication of whether or not you think free will exists. Because if you say that doesn't make sense, that someone would go back and then it would disrupt the timeline, then you're saying that there would be free will.
No, what I'm saying is that I don't believe in the ability to make time go backwards.
Oh, okay.
And so, like,
you just didn't answer the question correctly.
Well, I just think the question
What?
doesn't make sense.
I don't.
think the question like
Are you? Hold on,
yeah,
dude. You're accusing me of answering the question incorrectly when, like, you said. What was your question again? Restate your question.
I'm awful with restating. I'm gonna try my best. Do you think the time travel in Back to the Future makes sense?
Yeah, I said no.
Yeah, no.
That's answering the question properly. I said no because I don't believe in the ability to go back in time.
So I didn't ask the question. That's on me. Yes.
I think the way you're answering the question is not exactly. He didn't ask if you think time travel makes sense. He asked if you think time travel in Back to the Future makes sense. If it did exist, does this mechanic...
If time travel...
Yes, if time travel is possible,
just such a
does
big-
this mechanic... This is vague, broad
Okay, okay,
spectrum.
okay.
We're not
It's just an
solving the actual laws of
Okay.
how this works. Broad spectrum.
Yeah.
Would this be a sensible mechanic for how these things would operate based on your knowledge of the world and your beliefs?
Like, sure, but you're adding in such a big condition of being able to go back in time that I just don't think it becomes meaningful anymore.
yeah, I think I agree
Okay.
with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like it's
Then that's fine.
too big of an if statement to make everything else breaks. Like
Too many qualifiers?
Yeah. Yeah.
If I can, because I think we discovered a point of contention that I think is really important and cool. If we could keep working on this, yeah, if I could try to define it in another way, I don't see how the human decision-making process, whether or not it has metaphysical stuff going on or something, some other force is helping us make
Wait,
the decision
actually,
that we're not aware of.
I want to
Sure.
say one thing and then you can continue. I want to define one more thing. It's called Causa sui, and it's Latin.
Causa sui.
Causa sui. I had to look at the pronunciation. I watched 4 different videos on how to pronounce it.
Wow.
And only 3 of them agreed. I'm going with the 3 that agreed. Causa sui.
It's gonna be the one. that's
It's
wrong.
Latin, and it's just the idea that something can originate within oneself with no antecedent cause. It's just the idea that you can like generate an idea. That's the fundamental thing that's making us disagree. I just wanted to
Oh, I like that.
I just
yeah.
wanted to put that out there. Like, continue with what you were saying.
Yeah, how do you know that you have decisions you can make that don't come from anywhere? Like, are you able to see the entire contents of your mind and be aware of them? You're not. You're able to just be aware of a certain parts of your mind. You have this thing called consciousness where you have a space where you can pull up 2 movies and then make a decision on them. Those movies came from somewhere you are not aware of. So from that standpoint, how can you make the claim that anything else that you're doing that comes from places you're not aware of in your head has something called free will? It's like you're like the conductor of a train, and you have certain levers and stuff. But the mechanics of the train are happening outside of what you're doing, basically. They're their own thing, and without actually understanding how the train works, you don't know how to move it exactly. Then you could also make the point, who's pulling the levers? And I would argue that's the same thing, where in this case, you have actually the train is pulling the levers on itself. That's why I think consciousness doesn't.
Wait.
Whoa.
Okay, this is...
Yeah.
Can I jump in? 'Cause
Sure,
I got
sure.
2
Jump in
points.
all you want.
Yeah.
So, first of all, on the train, I would say I think the train's a great analogy, but I'm the conductor.
Yeah.
That's why I think that's an illusion. I think the train is conducting itself.
This is where
Then it's a bad analogy.
I
think- yeah,
I
it
don't
might be
think
a
it's
bad
the
analogy.
great.
Like the Back
Yeah.
to the Future analogy.
Yeah.
I don't think it's maybe the greatest answer from a philosophical standpoint, but for me, I'd say for a lot of these things, I don't know how much it matters. When you keep saying the stuff like it's an illusion,
Sure.
does
You
it
define
matter?
that.
yeah.
Will you deceive yourself your whole life if it leads to the greatest end? If you are able to achieve the greatest means, the greatest happiness, the greatest joy through deception, is that not the best way to live?
Yeah. At what point does illusion become reality?
So I'm glad that you brought that up because I had a feeling that you would bring that up. I think
Oh, you had a feeling.
I had a feeling.
Yeah.
Where did that feeling come from? No, it's okay.
I think that we can again separate this discussion. I think that there's a separate idea. Okay, do we all agree that free will exists? Do we not? Separately, does it matter? Right? And do we want to live in do we want to live our lives believing what we believe in a scientific perspective or whatever, or do we want to live in our life in a way that makes it most beneficial for us, or makes us most happy? Those are two separate ideas. I think that you can believe in free will or not believe in free will and still actively live your life as if you do have free will.
Interesting. Well, that and that gets back to maybe the criminal justice side of things, and like the real world implications is like, okay, if we as a society act as though there's free will, does that help us more? And I think in some cases, I think yes,
I agree.
acting as though it is.
I agree.
But I think going back again to the heart of the actual free will point. Let's say you had like a bunch of robots in a simulation doing things.
Okay.
And they acted pretty logical most of the time. Then every once in a while they made illogical decisions.
What do you mean by logical and illogical decisions?
Let's say they're living a good life, and then every once in a while they just start killing each other, or they
And
I don't
these
know,
are-
stacked emotionally. I don't. It does.
But these are run by computers?
Yeah, these run by
Okay.
computers.
Okay.
You can look as hard as you want, and you just can't figure out why the robot's doing that. You don't have the tools yet for some reason. I don't know. You can't, like, during the time of when it made that decision, you can't see the bottom of it, or maybe there's a physical glitch that's affecting the software or something. That's really hard to track, and maybe you just don't have the tools to do that. Does that mean those robots have free will? Like, as in, we don't understand how the
I
brain
see what
works
you're saying.
entirely.
Oh,
We don't have a
okay.
full, so you can say, okay, there's an intuition that comes in certain decision making.
I would have to say yes.
Whoa.
Oh,
Yes.
very interesting. So you're calling basically what we're saying is the robots are making a decision because of something we're not aware of, some
Like,
mistake
not the way
maybe,
that they
or
are.
a glitch,
you
or
essentially-
because of some lack of our understanding of how they work.
Like-
And because of that, that's free will.
Ethically, I have to say yes. Because if they do, and I'm denying them the ability of free will, that is inherently wrong. If I don't have all the facts and if they do have free will and I just don't know it, and I blatantly say, I don't know it, therefore you don't, I think that's ethically wrong.
So you're saying in the case of uncertainty, you have to assume the position that they do.
Yes. From an ethical standpoint.
So you
Very
think we could
interesting.
create robots that have what you're calling free will? Do you think that's possible?
Yes.
Do you think computers have free will?
It depends on the computer.
Oh, okay. So some computers have free will.
I'd say no.
Yeah, you'd say
Yeah.
no to that. Okay.
Like my PC, no.
Which computers have free will?
I am not versed in like every single computer on Earth. So
Wally.
I just
yeah, Wally has free will.
You know that's a animated
Yeah, I
character,
know that's
right?
an animated character.
okay. For
but-
example, okay, ChatGPT can give unexpected responses with certain prompts given to it. Is that free will?
Yes.
I don't. That just doesn't
does-
seem to make any logical
it
sense.
doesn't-
Okay, so
but-
okay.
okay,
Let's
so
say
if you-
ChatGPT can make the wrong responses based on certain inputs.
Mm-hmm.
That's free will. Therefore, if ChatGPT says hate speech accidentally, do we put ChatGPT in jail?
Do you pull the plug?
Well, we reform it.
We fix it.
Yeah.
Do we have hate and scar? Do we not like ChatGPT anymore because it said that?
Some
Do
people
we
might
do we
not.
emotionally have it?
Some people
Can we
might not. That's
justify
why
an
some
emotional?
people don't trust it. Because it said these erroneous things and it hasn't always been right, people have an inherent distrust of it.
Sure, but
So we have a bunch of physical like a bunch of matrices come together and make mathematical computation. They come out with an output that looks like something human to us, and humans assign emotion and stuff to that. And you're saying that there could be free will in there. Doesn't
There-
that kind of make free will meaningless? Because you're saying basically you can have a bunch of stuff going on, a random process like a neural network, and it can come out with something unexpected. That's free will? That seems like it loses all its meaning.
That's not what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I am saying if something is displaying like qualities of free will, not miscalculations. So if you are able to look through that matrix and see this is where it went wrong, which is what they're doing in a lot of cases. Be like, oh, this is where it went wrong in this matrix multiplication. We're going to fix that and refine it, i.e. moving from 3.5 to 4 to 0.1.
In GPT, you're saying?
In
Yeah.
GPT.
Okay.
That is refining a computational algorithm. But if there arises a problem that they cannot diagnose and they cannot see, like no matter how hard they try with current technology, you cannot rule out free will.
And
Okay.
your point is you can't rule it
So
out.
you're basically, if you can't track it and you can't see,
If you can't see where it splits from what is supposed to happen to what did happen,
you have, okay.
you can't rule out free will. And therefore, since you can't rule it out, you can't ethically say that it's not there. And you can't logically say definitively it's not there. So you can't.
Interesting. So you're saying you can take a bunch of things you understand, like matrix multiplication. You understand how ChatGPT works and that you understand the exact circumstances for how it was made, basically. You understand the math that was used to make it. You understand what's happening on a granular level. You just don't know what they look like when they all come together. And that somehow that leaves room for free will. That just doesn't really make sense to me. I don't know how you can take a bunch of logical operations, say, okay, there's no bugs going on here. It's doing what it's supposed to do, and yet it comes out with an unexpected answer. I just think that's always going to be like, oh, we just don't completely understand how it works. I still don't know where you could come up with free will.
And I think just quickly to jump into because I said the brain's a computer. We can study the brains. We've done this. We've done good studies. We've looked at the exact chemical routes that these things have taken. We know what reactions they should get due to wide studies of what general emotion or kind of thing somebody should feel based on these certain impulses. And then they'll do something that doesn't exactly make sense. I think it is possible. We've seen where where larger structures, the more complex something gets. Sometimes we do see weird divergences the more complex a mechanism gets. Even if we go to just a societal standpoint, you can have a small town that works perfectly. You put 45 towns together, you'll get some weirdness.
Yeah.
And is that free will?
Yes.
I just think that's meaningless.
I
don't.
Well,
it doesn't.
and this is where I think
Yeah.
if you get to the meaningless standpoint, you're not entirely wrong. But that's just because I wouldn't say I'm as liberal with assigning necessarily free will to things as Finian is, but I still think, no, I think free will is possible in a machine. I do. That's, I read one time somewhere, I think it was on it might have been social media, I'm not exactly sure, an interpretation of the Turing test. And is the test for the machine or us? Is it testing whether the machine has consciousness or if we think it does? Whoa. And with the ramifications of that, what matters more? And this is where because you tried to separate the arguments of the specific actual existence of free will and not, and then the belief of it.
Yeah.
But honestly, if I have to be completely frank, I think the physical existence of it is less important
Whoa.
Yeah.
than the belief, because as much as we are people of science, we're engineers.
Yeah.
We live our lives. Yes, we live in a world of physics, but you don't live your life thinking literally every single step about the different laws and why everything's happening.
Yeah, totally.
Obviously,
Yeah,
it comes to us
totally.
too much, a little bit too much. I think about moments randomly, but if I'm interacting with someone and they say something that's mean, it slights me. I'm not happy by that.
Yeah.
I don't spend my time thinking, did they make this logical choice, or was their body doing this due to just some form of chemical resistance, or they did something mean that wasn't nice.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to live through the belief of free will. That's whether it's a choice that I've made or not due to actual free will, that is the choice that I've made.
No, I'd actually disagree with that. I think actually there's a different way to live. I think
Okay.
there's a way to live that says, okay, that person just slighted me. They just said something unkind. Well, maybe they had a bad day. Maybe they didn't sleep well. Maybe someone else just said something unkind to them. I think if you actually always go on the other side and always take what are the circumstances that could have made them do this? I think you can lead with empathy almost every time. If you go the anti-free will route on all those kinds of interactions, I actually think they'd ultimately make more peaceful, rather than being like, oh, I'm annoyed now, and now I'm going to hold a little bit of bad energy towards that person. I just think that's not actually effective.
And that's where I'd say you're putting words in my mouth, because I would actually carry the exact same argument. Is that I think it is free will. Is that they might not have had a great day. They might have stubbed their toe, which meant that they're a little bit well off, and so they don't go about the route that's as kind. You know, they're not as focused on being a kind person, because it does, you know, take effort to go out of your way to be nice, to be charitable and charismatic.
Make the choice.
Yeah, and it's like I think it's entirely possible to be empathetic and to believe that they made the choice to be less kind. Obviously, it's not always the most like obvious choice. Like if I am not always the nicest person that I'd like to be, I don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, I'm going to be mean today.
Yeah.
It just tends to happen. Most people that are evil don't think they're evil. That's what makes them
Evil.
Dangerous. Yeah.
And I would argue that makes my point even more. It's like evil people. Evil people are just being evil because that's where the circumstances led them.
Well,
So that's another thing where it's like, you can take something that looks pretty simple to me. We're just a summation of a bunch of events that have happened to us, and we're making decisions based on that. And then you can take this free will node and stick it in there, and you could say, okay, now we're just going to add this thing that doesn't really logically make sense. We can't prove it doesn't exist, but we're just going to throw it in there because I have the feeling it does. It just doesn't make sense to me. With all these things, I think it's simpler. It makes more sense. I think it makes more logical sense, and I think it actually leads to a better world if we just say, okay, that's just another human going throughout their day. They had a bad day. They had a bad childhood, and so they grew up and they weren't as great, maybe. They did some bad things. I think if you look at every action is just a summation of other events that have happened, I think it leads to just like, wow, we don't need, like, I'm not better than that person because I came up with this idea and they didn't come up with this idea. Or like,
It gets rid of ego, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they're not worse than me because they did something bad and I didn't do something bad. They got unfortunate. They didn't get the same events that I had. They didn't. So I just think when you start looking at it from that realm, like that viewpoint, it's just a way to just be like, whoa, compassion to everyone. I don't know. I'm not trying to be like a hippie world peace. I don't know, but I just think it's a really nice way to get there. To be like, wow, everyone's just doing. Everyone's just reacting.
Your toe stubbing example and sort of expand upon it. I think that when you stub your toe, that is when the choice occurs for the rest of the day whether or not you're going to be a bad person. It's not an ongoing choice. It is right there. Will I let this thing affect the rest of my day? So like you think back when like you stub your toe or something, you're like, man, I'm not going to let this affect the rest of my day. I'm going to keep going. This didn't matter. That was that was a choice that you took right in the moment. You didn't let it affect you. So taking your example of like circumstances, I'm actually going to say something here that builds off of my whole thing earlier about like understanding. I don't think like fully formed I don't think like young children have free will because of the nature that their brain isn't fully developed yet. And there is no set point in which free will occurs. This is now a personal thing. I'm not saying it does or doesn't. This is a personal thing. I don't think free will exists in like children because they aren't developed enough in order to make those choices about, I stubbed my toe, I'm not going to let this affect the rest of my day.
So if
they have a primitive form of free will in like the thing of like, oh, I'm going to play with this train or I'm going to play with these blocks. Like they have overarching, but they don't have a full-fledged, like full release of free will as adults do, which is part of the reason why we try people as adults and we try them as minors. We as
in the justice system.
In the justice system, we as a society have recognized that younger people don't have the same amount of free will as older people do.
Or their brains just aren't as developed, or they don't
Which
have the
is-
centers of their brain that make decisions.
Which is the same thing.
I don't think so. No,
Okay.
I think I just think you're making things more complicated than they need to be.
Really quickly, and I do
think you're
completely understand
oversimplifying-
where you
oversimplifying.
like to simplify so much of it, but it's so as I've been sitting here, I just keep drawing parallels between, because so many of the things that you've said are beliefs that I share, yet from a viewpoint of free will. Like it's
Yeah.
based in, like, my ideology is based in the belief that there is free will, and yet I share so many of the same sentiments of, like, you know, somebody was raised a certain way, and so this has shaped, you know, personality. This has shaped how they will react. But that's kind of shaping the kind of that personality, and then this entity approaches the crossroads, and then they make the choice. Like, I still think there is a certain degree of, like, how all these circumstances add together, but also where I think the free will portion of this becomes important is where you get the instances of people that act in spite of their circumstances. Because there are things where some people have had, like, the harshest upbringings. They have utterly the most tragic pasts imaginable. And then they are the kindest people. They're the most devoted to their communities. They've put in the most effort. They've achieved the greatest things in spite of such hardship.
The dude that we want to get on,
What?
the YouTuber.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a person that we want to get on the podcast who was diagnosed with, like, terminal brain cancer, and he just started making videos about it, and he's like, just seems like a nice dude. He's totally, like, accepted the fact that he's going to die, you know, in like 15 months, and just he doesn't like to take charity, and he just, like, seems like a normal person. He, like, doesn't let that affect him. That's kind of what you're.
Yeah, I was just
Going for.
I was making a callback.
Yeah.
I kind of want to try something. I want everyone to switch their standpoints and argue the opposite side. So
I don't think Liam can physically do that.
I'll try my best.
I want people
I'll steal Mad Free
try.
Mill.
I want you to try to argue. Like, I think where we're at, you two don't believe free will exists.
Yeah.
And I think us two do.
Yeah.
So I want us to switch
I think
and
that's a great
revisit
idea.
some of the topics that we've talked
Okay.
about.
Yeah.
And then you two argue
Yeah.
for free will and we'll argue against.
I wanted to like reconvene with the four of us.
Yeah, we can do
And
that right now.
and I think I know where everyone stands.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna say what I think, and then if I'm wrong at all, correct me.
Yeah, we'll do.
So here's where I think we're at. Liam and I take the perspective where your brain is essentially a neural network. You know, based on your genetics and everything, and based on how you were born, it's a certain way, and all the things that happen, all the input that all your sensors get, your nose, your mouth, your eyes, all these things add input. These different processes happen. Your neural network gets tuned, and then when you're quote unquote making a decision based on the current inputs and the pre-existence of how your neurological, let's say, you know, the neural net, whatever, is made up, electrons fire and these things to quote unquote make a decision, and then that's what, right? That's kind of where
sure.
that's kind of where we're at. And I think Brendan and Finian are at the standpoint of yes, but there's that causa sui, there's that like thing that either originates in your consciousness or originates somewhere else within you that is affecting that decision, that has say in that decision, whether it's your soul, whether it's a scientific consciousness, like wherever it comes from, there's something within you that's altering it. And I think Liam and I are like, that's just not there, right?
Yeah.
Is that how we're all?
Yeah.
What do you, Brendan's not?
Yes. No, I think you're right about my standpoint. I think it's just I as much as I am a proponent of free will, I don't want to create a complete, schism from the physical existence, because it is an integral, it's obviously a part of us. Our brain is what's mandating this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I just have made a choice, funny word, in this circumstances, but I've just made the choice
Titty?
to equate these interactions in the brain to free will. There's a certain degree of flux even in the structure of the brain. Like as you, I forget the specific cortex, but there's one that I've read saw some stuff about where it's like the more you do stuff that you don't want to, it grows. And it's just there's such an ability to change, a fluidity in the brain, in the actions that we take. I like to equate that to free will. And this is where I am perfectly happy if I get proven wrong. If someone comes out with a paper and it describes all the processes in the brain and how this equates to our belief of choice, I will happily accept that.
Right.
Yeah.
Because as I said earlier, I personally care more about how I choose to view it than the actual fact.
And I actually agree with you on that. I
Yeah.
actually agree. I like to live my life thinking that I have free will, because if I don't, I feel like my life is meaningless, because I feel like I don't actually have any control over what happens to me.
That was actually a question that I thought about asking Liam. Is like how do you find purpose in what you do?
I was gonna ask the same thing. to
If
him.
you find all of your circumstances as the source of what's happening and not you, if the control is not coming from some choice that you've made, where do you find empowerment in what you do?
Where do you find
Well,
purpose?
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think from the other side of that, I think if you live as though you have this feeling like you're whatever that could mean, you're responsible for your actions, even though they're not logical, and there's intuition, and that somehow gives free will. Even if you make such an illogical argument, I don't see how that makes my life any better. I don't know. Like, I think the other side of that is like, okay, if I'm just a product of circumstances, then I feel like that's just the most relaxed. I can just live in the moment. I can just be like, well, maybe there isn't a point. Maybe we're just here, and we make a lot of meaning out of it. Like we make meaning out of this podcast. We make so much meaning that we can build phones and we can build great stuff. And I think that's cool.
But doesn't that fill you with dread? It's like, oh, I'm just here. Like living my life as though I have free will brings me joy, because I can like sit in my room and be like, I'm gonna do this thing because I can. I am not doing it because something else is determining that I should do it, or that anything else is making me do it. I'm doing it because I want to. And that makes me happy. And I think from a standpoint of there's no free will, you'll live a gray life.
I think the opposite, right? You just said from the standpoint that there is free will, you'll live a great life.
No, gray.
Gray life.
Gray life.
I think you
Sorry.
catch monotone.
Oh,
Sorry.
sure, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Monochrome, all that.
Yeah.
But if I, can jump back in, what I was going to say is something that slight tangent but related, something that I have struggled to come to terms with is the presence of ambition in people. And this is where, and I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with but I just feel like there's a certain degree of complacency in the acceptance of like, this is the way the world works. And yes, you refer to it as relaxed, but that's not a viewpoint that I'm comfortable with. And I've gone through life, I've interacted with different people, and I can't live my life with a lack of purpose. It fills me with dread. Like I have had coworkers who I worked with someone. She had been in the same job making minimum wage for 37 years.
Wow.
And that I had to talk with my parents about this, because I was like, what is this? Like I physically couldn't fathom this settlement of the circumstances. And that's kind of where I go into the free will, is I want to go through life with this viewpoint that I'm pushing, that there is some fight in me. If like there's that existence of free will, there's this ability to resist. I don't know if but that's something that I just kind of view as uniquely human, is it's this ability to improve, to strive. it's the dopamine in the brain, the molecule of more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The molecule of more.
Yeah, it's the name of the book that I'm reading.
Okay.
But I think that it's like, I would say that I am ambitious. I have things that I want to do, and I'm unsettled, but I just find it complacent. And that's purely from a personal standpoint. That's no scientific answer.
Sure.
But I am not personally comfortable with things being out of my hands.
Well, and I think control is a really big part of it. I think, like, for
I think
example,
that
if
is
you were to build
majority of
if
the
you were
part.
trying to build like autonomous beings or like robots that could think and do stuff, if they got complex enough, I bet you'd want to give them the idea that they have free will, because it might make them more sane. They might keep running into kind of logical pits if you didn't give them that sense. If they thought, well, okay, nothing that I do matters and everything's preordained or everything's decided by a bunch of factors that are out of my hands, I think you're right that certain like intelligent creatures you could make would not work as well if they had that sense. So maybe they need to have free will built in. I still don't think that implies free will. I think free will is basically just, I think humans have always struggled with this idea of what's our purpose? Why are we here? I mean, we create religions, I think actually some of the biggest conflicts ever and the biggest things that have always been problems for humans are kind of this, come back to this idea of why we're here. Is it my God? Is it your God? Is it God or is it not God? Or whatever it is. I think a lot of them do end up coming to God for some reason. But I think that's just because humans might work better as a society if we arbitrarily decide there's a purpose. But just like the existence of God or not, which I'm not claiming to know the answer to, I don't think that it makes the most logical sense to just say, well, my life will work the best and I'll feel like I have the most meaning if I decide if I have free will. If I live as though I have free will. I don't think that actually makes free will a thing, though.
I would like to clear
I think it's
up-
the same thing as God.
I would like to clear up a misunderstanding that I think
Sure.
we have. I think you are under the impression of my argument of we can't rule it out, therefore it is.
Mhm.
I am not
No,
saying
I'm not. No, that's
that
not
it
what I
ex-
think you think. Yeah.
Okay.
You're saying we can't rule it out. That's all you're saying.
I'm saying
I
we
believe
can't
it.
rule it out, therefore we have to act as though it is there. I'm not saying that it is there. I'm saying that we have to treat that person as if it is there.
He's saying, in case it is, he's like, if you have to choose one or the other, it's more ethical to go with the idea that they have free will, in case that they do.
Sure.
That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I'm not saying that because we don't know, it has to be there. I'm saying because we don't know, we should act as though it is there. It's about how you treat that person rather than whether or not it exists or not.
And I would argue the best way to treat people of all is to not act as though they have free will.
So you shouldn't lock anyone up.
That's going back to, I just think if you treat everyone as though they're just a product of circumstances, I think that's the most compassionate and empathetic way you could view people. Because there's literally nothing they could do that could make you unempathetic toward them, if you view it from that standpoint.
Then there's nothing they could do to like make you feel anything towards them.
You can feel emotions towards them as long as you're able to. As long as you're able to assign to that like, okay, those are feelings.
But so you're saying
Feelings can be useful, but they're still just feelings.
You're saying you go through your day-to-day life seeing everyone as essentially automatons.
I have a life philosophy that is based on that. So yeah, I think that's I don't see everyone that way, but if someone does something to piss me off, I might have an emotion. I'm like, that pissed me off. Okay, now what am I going to do with that? I'm like, okay, that pissed me off.
Does that not make you make any
And
choice?
actually, I tend to think that when you have an emotion that pisses you off about something else, I think that emotion is uniquely yours. I don't think other people can piss you off.
So from your standpoint, like
That I would
everyone
agree
is
with.
essentially like metaphorically a painted robot.
Painted robot. What does that mean?
So like they underneath like who they are, everyone is the same. They don't really have any choice in the matter. They're pre-programmed. But the
He's
way
not saying pre-programmed.
No, definitely not. I'm saying you could add randomness in there. I don't think randomness changes the
He just means that
conversation.
they didn't choose, like stimuli, different
Okay,
inputs
okay.
and stuff
Sure,
Right.
has
yeah.
led to this turn of events.
Right.
And I'd also just make the argument that adding more complexity or the possibility for acting as if there's more complexity than what logically makes sense,
I don't
think makes any sense.
I don't mean
think there's any reason to do
pre-programmed
that.
in the sense of their actions are decided before they do it. I mean pre-programmed in the sense of they have a set way of in and out. So stimuli in, stimuli out.
Got it. Like at any given point, the neural net is what's choosing
Correct.
or choosing what happens.
Depending on your standpoint.
That's really interesting. So Liam, when you like show up late or miss a frisbee practice, do you put zero blame on yourself then? Because if you live in this philosophy of I couldn't choose, it wasn't my fault. Is that how you live?
How do you treat accountability?
No, if the process of me saying that's not good, I should fix that. That process is just a physical process like anything else. That's just a logical response to doing something improper. And that process of going through that
What in
helps
your
me fix
mind
that.
says it's improper? Like,
Deep paths that were made at some point. That's the thing. I think our consciousness or whatever it is, whatever we're aware of, I think is just the tip of the iceberg. So I think there's lots of things in my head I'm not aware of. I just think adding something you're calling free will to that stuff that I'm not aware of is just, it's like making things more complicated than they need to be. It's like, why add complexity there when there's no logical basis?
So
there's no
you're taking
need
the
for
standpoint
it. There's basically like,
essentially-
okay, let's say you have like a neural network that's able to make decisions. You're not able to track all of the decisions. You don't know why it makes some of the decisions, but you know that everything still came from a really simple neural network, or maybe it's more complicated, but it's like, it came from a neural network either way.
Mm-hmm.
What is the use of calling it free will if we don't understand it? Like, how does that actually help? Why would we do that?
An analogy. I'd say it's how we exist. That's the human element.
yeah.
I would say that if I had to be correct, I would say that yes, the choices that we made are a biological process.
Whoa.
No. If I have to put my foot down here, it's a biological process. That's how science works.
Yeah.
It's a biological process. But I think in the operation of our world, the biological process element is not what matters.
And I agree with that.
And we've circled back to that many times.
Yes.
The existence of it, but like I think because you talk about how like because he talked about how you deal with accountability and all that, but it's like where you place blame, I think an internal locus of control,
Yeah.
which I think that is incredibly important to someone's existence. I think that for my mental health and all these things, I think that that's a vital thing to kind of understand, is that it's like, if something has happened that I am not happy with, it is most likely derived from a choice that I made. Like if I didn't get a grade that I was looking for on a test, it's because I didn't put in as much effort as I could to study.
Sure.
And I just think, but like that was a choice. But it's like I chose not to study for things that were easier. I chose to, sit around, do something rather pointless, objectively speaking.
And you'd agree that the response to that of your mind should be to update the neural processes that made you lead to a choice where you didn't study as much as you should.
But it doesn't. I don't study more. I don't study any more than I did sophomore year of high school.
Yeah, I don't really either.
But
I mean,
Liam is taking the standpoint of Occam's razor to the extreme. The simplest explanation
It is Occam's razor.
is normally the correct one.
yeah.
So you're taking that to the absolute extreme, which is for us to make decisions, there cannot be any extra element in there.
And if I were to take what I think is you guys' argument to the extreme, I think you guys' argument leads to heaven and hell. And good people get to have eternal pleasure and bad people have eternal suffering. Is this idea that like there is a soul and there's good and bad. And so if your decisions add up and they're positive. They sound a good decision. Like your overall you did good in your life, then you get to be eternally in heaven. And if overall you did bad in your life, you get to suffer eternally. I see that as the same thing as I see that as the logical extension of your argument. Because what you're saying is basically, yeah, I have responsibility. There's some free will. There's some me that maybe it just comes from physical stuff, but there's still some me making decisions. And that the result of that is deserving of pleasure or pain based on what comes out of it. Is that not what you guys are saying? Because that's ultimately what it comes out to be. It's like, okay, you can jail someone because it's useful for society, but you're also jailing them because they're bad. And they kind of deserve to suffer because their result from all the stimuli and all the processes was something bad. And so they deserve to suffer for it. That's what I see when I hear you guys, that's what I don't know how I don't know how you don't get to there from your argument.
You're taking, I do see how you got there. For me, it is not about the stimuli or any of the inputs that like mattered. Like, it is about the conscious choices. So yes, the good, the bad. I believe that like what our purpose is to figure out what is good, what is bad. That is like the entirety of what humans are trying to do, for better or for worse. Like, that's why we created religion, to try and figure out whether or not things are good or bad. That's why we created the justice system, to try and legally, logically figure out why things are good or bad. Religion is sort of the feeling of whether or not something's good or bad, whereas like legally is the logical side of it. And science is the exploration of the universe to try and get more information about what is good or what is bad. The entirety of the human existence is like, if the human race lived forever, at the very end of the universe, we would be able to have an exact list of all good and bad and everything in between. That is what I think. That is what we are meant to do. So me being a mechanical engineer with all my beliefs and thoughts that go along with that, I am trying to further the human progression in any minimal way to get us closer to that inevitable list of the good and the bad, so that our like knowledge is complete. The quest for knowledge is my purpose.
So you think humans, our goal is to just make a naughty and nice list? Ultimately, no? Is that, I mean, but you're saying that.
It's not so black and white. Like,
is that like what does that mean? What is good and bad?
That's for us to figure out.
I mean, the way I see it, from just the points you made there, I think you could even graph this. You could make a point where you could say, okay, a religious way of taking care of things is you have good and bad. If you're good, you're good. If you're bad, you die, for example. Maybe that's it. And we think, okay, that person, we think they did something bad, so I feel like religious decision making is almost it's based more on dogma and ideology than actual logical making decisions. And then you have like a justice system up here. And it's like you could even make a line out of it. For example, you could say, okay, up here you have, okay, we're going to look at things logically. We're going to try to strip away religion and maybe dogma from it and look at actually, okay, part of what we're doing up here in the criminal justice side is we're actually trying to respond to people's acts as though it was just logical stuff that led them there, basically. So if you make a line there, if you say, okay, this one down here is dogma and it's emotion, this one up here is logic and we're doing it because it makes sense. If you make a line and look where that goes, I don't see any free will up here. Because up in the extreme of where that's going, you're just saying, okay, maybe the best way to run things is to act as though it's just logical. Because if you strip away any of this good and bad feelings, good feelings, suffering, and non-suffering for people like as punishments or not punishments. If you strip away all that, what we're really trying to get to is just, okay, what runs society better? And I would argue if you keep going up there and towards what runs society better, it might be that we strip away any of that, and it's just like there's no free will obviously up there. I don't know if that made sense, but
the act of what you just did has taken away the object of free will. It's taken away the possibility of people making their own decisions by saying, oh, this is going to be a data point on this graph. I no longer care about any other like stimuli or actions. This outcome is what I'm going to put on this graph. Religion, the outcome of religion, I'm going to put it down here. This is where it's going to be. The act of the justice system, I'm going to put it up here. And we're going to graph a line. The act of doing that has taken away the essence of like what we're trying to do. Like even right now with this podcast, we're trying to like further our understanding of free will. If we just take whatever episode 13 and we put it like smack in the middle, we've taken away our conversations, we've taken away everything within it and condensed it down to this individual data point which can't
datum point. Continue.
This individual datum point that has no other meaning except coordinates on a graph.
Okay.
So I don't think you can use that to define whether or not there's free will because you've lost it. It's like lossy compression.
Brendan, any thoughts?
I want to hear Brendan's thoughts on this.
Well, one thing I have to say about Liam's viewpoint is that I feel like it's extremely utilitarian.
Yes. Yes.
Extremely. And that's I think the main thing that repels me is that it's just the word that came to mind is it's almost like naively optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's because I love to be an optimist. I personally, I think it's the best way to live your life. But I just think that it just doesn't seem to fit with how things operate, with how I understand people, is this belief of like, we use these methods because it runs society better, but we're too driven by these emotions, these personal feelings. It's like, I have chosen to hold a grudge. Choice is the choice word, I know. But it's like the criminal justice system, I don't have a history book out here, but it was probably not founded out of logic.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably founded out of like, that dude stole my chicken, I'm going to put him in a box.
An eye for an eye.
Yeah.
You did this thing to me, so I'm going to do this thing to you.
Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, we'll all be blind and toothless.
Is right.
Say that again?
An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and then we'll all be blind and toothless. Like, that's not a logical mechanism.
Yeah. Where do you sit on this, Ben?
Wow.
I've been watching your face. You're like, wow.
I'm absolutely loving this conversation so far. A very quick summary of my view is biologically, scientifically, at this point, I don't believe in free will because I don't yet see the room for the Causa sui. That's like I think the key here is do I see a room for that in consciousness? Right now I don't. But that being said, totally disagree with Liam. And I do agree with Brendan and Finian that like you just living life believing that free will doesn't exist is just, I don't think, a good way to live my life. And there's this guy.
You do live your life. You just said that you don't believe that free will exists. Oh, you're saying live it like
belief versus fact.
Correct.
Yeah.
Belief versus fact. That's the distinction I'm
making.
Sorry. No, all good. And yeah, so there's this there's this guy, Robert Sapolsky. He's like a neuroscientist. He's written some books. He's like one of the biggest modern proponents for the no free will argument. And I was listening to a podcast with Neil deGrasse Tyson, whatever, and he was saying he was like 13 when he realized free will cannot exist. And he's like, from the time that I was 13 to now, I maybe have been able to actually live my day believing that it didn't exist like a couple times. He's like, even
really
though
hard.
I know it doesn't exist, I cannot live
really
my
difficult.
life like that. We have built society so heavily upon the idea that free will does exist that it's so hard to live your life as if it doesn't. Live your life as if you're making no decisions. Live your life as if nobody in the entire world is doing anything that they have any control over. I think it's so impossible to live like that.
Well, okay, where is what I'm saying you should do different than what you guys are saying we should do with that? Like, where does my lack of belief for free will in day-to-day, where does that actually differ? Because we should
The
define
entire
that.
thing.
Well, what
Yeah.
I think we're
but
saying
give
is,
a specific example. Give an
Oh,
example
okay,
of
okay.
something
Well-
that happens and how I would respond to it differently than you guys based on this belief.
well, because I think we agree in fact. I think it's the belief system is where
Hold on,
we're
wait.
diverging.
Do we?
Do
'Cause
we?
I know that the two of us believe in fact, and I think that you believe.
I'm down with the biological explanation.
Whoa. So
That's what I was
think at
saying.
this point, the
Because
three of us.
I'm the same thing with the Causa Sui
Yeah.
is I would love to throw it in there, but I don't
Yeah.
yet have an answer of where it would go.
Yeah.
If we can throw it in there, I think that's cool. That makes things so much more interesting.
Yeah.
But
totally.
I don't yet have the answer of where it goes.
So I think that from a scientific standpoint, the three of us agree that free will doesn't exist.
If I've got to put my foot down, I'd have to stand on this side.
So, Gideon,
I
it's 3v1.
I know.
Well, actually,
Well,
should we answer
no, it
Liam's
doesn't
question
matter. Yeah,
first,
that's-
or
What?
Yeah, sure. Where does it actually affect in the day-to-day?
So just to
Everywhere.
recap, do you go through your day-to-day life thinking that free will doesn't exist?
Well, I've pretty much always tried to live as compassionately as possible. So I don't know. I think
I
from
don't
that
think that's
standpoint,
the answer to the
That's
question.
not answering the question.
You can be compassionate and have free will. I
let me-
don't think these things, or
They're
believe
not
in free
mutually
will.
exclusive.
let me
Yes.
finish my point. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
The basis of a lot of my decisions are from this philosophy. I think most of my decisions in life stem from it, and I think the things that I do where I disagree with it, or I'm like, shoot, I wish I didn't do that, are mostly when I actually deviate from it. Mostly when I have an interaction with someone where I act irrationally or emotionally and I do something I regret. Those are the times that I actually think I deviate from my free will position, and those are the things that I regret the most. So actually, I'd argue that most of my life I do live as though there's no free will.
Interesting.
when
And
you
when
just,
I actually get emotional, I get hot, and I get like in the moment, I'm like, he really pissed me off there. Like, and now he's being a dick about it, and now he keeps going on it, and now he's getting in my face. Like, and maybe I make a decision. I don't get in fights, so this isn't great. But
you
like,
make a decision?
But like maybe I say something I could later
you just
on.
said you make a decision, dude.
Well, I think that's where we get into the
Dude, yeah,
structural
I think
concept
we- I
of
think
society's
we've come
based
to
in
a-
free will.
Yeah, but I think we've come to
the
the agreement, like making a decision from the biological standpoint just
Yeah,
means my
all right,
brain
all
has
right.
made a decision. So that's always what I'm
Making-
going to mean when I
Okay,
say
all
this,
right,
make a
all right,
decision.
all
By
right.
saying
Continue.
making a decision, like,
I'm
or
ragging
like
on you.
choice, we
That's
can
just
agree
the
that.
vocabulary that exists.
Okay.
Yeah,
No, but
All right.
I just want to put it back in you guys again. Where is what I'm saying actually different day to day from what you guys
I
are doing?
think
You can say
everywhere.
you keep saying that, Ben. Can you give me an example? Sorry, but like
Yeah, sure. Let's say you don't study for an exam and you get a bad grade. In your perspective, you'd be like, oh man, nothing I could have done about it. In my perspective,
that's not my perspective.
Okay, so then what's your perspective?
My perspective is, shoot, there was an error in the process that led me to not studying as much. I should study more next time.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So
So you're saying there's an unknown quantity or qualifier in the process.
Right, the process made an error. Let's update the process that it works better and it
How do you
studies better
update the
next time.
process?
How do you know what
Just
the
thinking
error
about
is?
it.
You can just
I don't know.
manifest
I don't know how to tinker around in the brain, but I know that the brain is able to learn and update. That's something I think we can. the three of us, if we're
Okay.
agreeing on a biological basis of no free will, then we can agree that the brain can biologically update and repair
Okay,
itself
okay,
based on
okay.
stuff. And I can biologically, I can make decisions that update my brain. Like it's like a recursive process there from that standpoint. I think we can all agree that that can all happen without there being free will. I thought that's what we agreed on.
Well, I was mostly just agreeing in the fact that this is based in like a physical process, and it is controlled and regulated through these different chemicals and systems and circuits. Not necessarily that it's like, I'm reprogramming myself.
Well, then what are you doing whenever you like learn
Well,
something?
no. I am saying there is an adaptation, but I don't know. Something about your explanation doesn't click, and
Well, I think it's
I haven't
uncomfortable for
yet
people.
crafted the response that I'd like to give. Your explanation feels fallacious.
I think I know what's going on here. Let me get to the bottom of this.
Okay.
I like it. I love it.
I think that. Okay, I think that Liam and the three of us disagree with like what it means to live your life in the camp of free will versus no free will, because from Liam's perspective, I think that like functionally, Liam still behaves the same way that we do, but we attribute it as us choosing, and he attributes it as his brain doing biological stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's
Okay.
what
Yes.
the deal is, right? I think like we kind of effectively live the same way, but you just attribute it to a biological thing, and we attribute it to like our consciousness, so to speak.
Right. So if I'm able to attribute it to a biological thing, where does
Then-
the free will come in to help?
So then,
Where does the belief in free will help your lives different from mine if
so-
I'm able to live the same way without it?
now I think there isn't a difference, because as long as you're thinking in the way that your brain is going to update, and you're still, I think the key is putting blame. I think that the key is putting blame on yourself, putting blame on others where appropriate. And I think that if you can do that through your own philosophy, it doesn't actually matter whether or not that comes from biological or where that comes from consciousness in your perspective. I think that they can be functionally the same thing.
And I absolutely. And I'd say, okay, you're placing blame. If you're able to even see, like, okay, you've blame comes to help with the process of updating. Like to say, okay, there was a problem here, we should fix that. And maybe that's a mental thought, maybe your subconscious does that. I don't think that really matters. This basically, something needs to change, something went wrong. If you can then take a step back and say, okay, that's great, let's work on that. But that problem that needs to be fixed still just came out of all the circumstances that led me here. And so that's nice. That's relaxing. That's almost like you can
okay.
have that. You can have that and say you need to fix that. You can do everything you need to fix that. But then you can also take a step back and take a breath of air and say, oh wow, but that still just happened as a product of everything. And that's nice. And you can use that to say, well, I still have tons of compassion for myself. I think that's where
That's where the difference comes in,
That's
yeah.
where the empathy comes in my opinion.
I'm going to say something crazy here.
Let's hear it.
I'm sort of in the same camp as Liam.
That is crazy.
That is crazy.
I do live day-to-day life. I think of me as a person as three different people.
Ooh.
Is this gonna be like id, super
Do they have names?
ego situation?
No.
Brian.
Like they're all they're all me, but there's the past, the now, and the future.
Interesting.
I know all the things that I chose to do in the past that has led me here. So I don't live with like any regrets about what I've done.
Okay.
Because I know all the circumstances around what I did, and I know the choice that I took with the information at the time.
Okay.
And I live my life trying to make the best choices with the current information that I have, with the understanding that my future self will know what, like, the circumstances around the choice.
And this is where something that I, in my personal philosophy, diverging from, the science talk that we've had, just, yeah, well, we've been getting into this quote unquote neuroscience. But I'm just being like pure personal philosophy is, no, the kind of the credo of like live without regrets is something that I've tried to kind of push on myself. Is like, this is something that I need to make as a vital part of myself. I saw an interesting reference that I thought of instantly when Finian was talking is there's only two people that you need to make happy in your life, and that's 70-year-old you and 7-year-old you.
Wow.
Like at the culmination of your life, you'll probably have lived the most complete life if those two people are happy.
I can do that. Yeah.
Wait. Interesting. Expand on that, please.
Yeah.
Well, it's the concept of like, you have no regrets at 70, yet you've also fulfilled these wonderful delusions of a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I think,
essentially pursuing your dream.
well, yes, and that's where I talked about ambition, but I think there's almost a certain degree of delusion that's important. You need to kind of delude yourself because there's such power in just doing things. The ability, some people say like, manifest and all that, but it's like the ability, you can create your own opportunities and you can pave your own path. You can achieve your dreams. It's just whether you do. A quote that I really love, and I don't have it out on me word for word, but it's from Chris Bumstead. He's, 7-time Olympia bodybuilding champion. He said it on a podcast, and it was that like whatever your dream is, you tell yourself it's too hard, and then you realize it's not too hard. You just tell that you've told yourself that it's impossible, but then you realize it's not impossible. It's just really hard, but you're not willing to realize that you are unwilling to put in the work that it requires. So you lie to yourself that it's impossible rather than struggling to achieve your dream. You lie to yourself. You're not willing to put in this effort. And everything is possible. It's just how much you're willing to sacrifice and how much you're willing to put in. But you can achieve what you want to achieve. Some of them just might take ridiculous sacrifice that is impossible for the average person. Like it is really hard. You're going to have to struggle and sacrifice, and you're not going to be able to live the life of your peers if you want to, do something insane. And it's the realization is like you need to, I think, to live without regrets, you need to realize that everything is possible. You can do what you want. You can create your opportunities. I've experienced great things through just going out and reaching out to people. Like you can just reach out to people and do great things. People are willing to help you. People want to reciprocate.
That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Really like that.
And I think like another piece of that is I think it's all sort of probabilistic. So like you can have a great dream, you can do everything right to get there, and you can still fail to get there. Right? Because that's just part of probability. So then what do you do with that?
Keep going.
You just keep going.
Because
But do you hold content towards yourself for not making your
because
dream? Yeah.
I wouldn't because of the way I live
tried. You tried your best.
Yeah, I know. Given the information that I had at the time, I made the right choice.
Sure.
but I can also keep trying.
You can
Yeah.
also keep
Just
trying if that's what you decide to do.
fall, you can fall from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows. That doesn't mean you can climb back. You are unable to climb back up.
Sure.
Just because you suffer, some event, you can put in all the effort to, as Finian keeps putting it, with all of the knowledge that I have. I believe that I have done everything as well as I can, but I still fail. That doesn't mean I can't do better. I know more now.
Mm-hmm.
I am able to do more. All I strive to be is the best me.
Sure.
I want to be the most intelligent, the most capable, the most friendly, the most well-rounded, the most present, the happiest.
The quest for knowledge about how to be your best you.
Eudaimonia, as Aristotle put it. The end of all ends.
Just to bring things back real quick, if I don't know if I've exhausted this
to the
point,
future.
but if we take that again, where does the way I'm saying you should live your life, where does that actually deviate from you guys? Because I don't have any deviations from what Brendan
I don't
just
think
said.
you and I
So then
have that much deviation.
Where's the point of content? I'm basically saying, okay, we agree that there's no biological, there's not really a biological argument for free will.
Mindset.
So it's a mindset, and yet my mindset of no free will, allows me to live a life
They're
that's
different, not wrong.
but where's the difference? That's what I'm saying. Where's the difference?
It's
In actual living day to day, where's the difference in decisions? That's what
it's
I'm
the difference in
asking
how
for.
we view things, not how we treat or respond to things.
But then
Just
why? But
because
then why is
you
the
can
why
look
is
at
the
two things
viewpoint
differently and
integral?
respond
Why is the
the same
viewpoint
way.
really important then? If it leads to the same
Was it?
same.
Can I chime in here?
Yeah.
I think that there are multiple viewpoints that you can assume within the no free will viewpoint. Liam takes one that effectively is very similar, or if not the same as the one that we take. The other viewpoint that you could take within that same umbrella is that you're totally passive, nothing matters.
Yeah,
right?
that would be stupid.
Which you don't live
That's
like
your-
that,
Yeah.
right? So I
Yeah.
think that effectively you live in the same way, but if you took it to the extreme of the no free will, then that's where I think it's bad.
And I think that's perfect because what it shows is that you guys assume that not having free will comes with all these other things like a lack of ambition, a lack of changing, a lack of self-responsibility. What I'm trying to show is that those concepts actually exist outside of whether free will is real or not. I'm trying to say that I can live a life with all those things without believing there's free will. And that by doing that, I'm trying to show that free will is actually not even a part of those things. It doesn't actually need to be a part of them. I'm saying I think
So
those are
you're-
just independent concepts. I think this thing you're calling free will is like a separate concept that tries to take responsibility for all these things like responsibility and actually getting things done. And I'm trying to say I actually don't think it is. I think we're attributing those things, but I think when you actually strip it away like I'm doing, you can see that it's not actually needed. And that's why I'm asking, can we find any points where my lack of thinking free will, does that actually hinder lifestyle? And I'm saying like, we can't find any.
Yes, I would say the core philosophy does not hinder life. It's how you treat it, like Ben was saying. It's you've come at it, as you mentioned many times, from the standpoint of compassion. You're trying to minimize suffering. You can realize that we're all just people doing stuff, and it's like, and that's where it's just I like to view life with a similar viewpoint, yet from the camp of free will. That makes more sense to me logically.
Sure.
Is that we experience this breadth of emotion, the highest of highs, the lowest of low, through these choices we make, rather than, I want to treat people equally because we're all in it together as, just people experiencing stuff. I like it as, we're all people, we've made these choices, we've come together. We can choose, we can grow, we can choose to be better.
And I just sorry, one more thing. I know I keep hitting this, but like what I'm basically trying to get at is that we can live the same life, but with different opinions on this core belief of whether believing free will is real or not
Yes.
actually affects your life. If we can live the same life without that idea, then I could ask you this. Well, what happens if you go free will maximalist? I think you end up with religion. I think you end up with, if you have sin, you deserve to die or to rot forever in hell. I think that is ultimately where that goes. So if you look on one side, you have, there's no free will. Therefore, yeah, you should be compassionate to everyone and empathetic. Doesn't matter what people do, you can still find ways to be empathetic for them. I think you look at you go the complete opposite side and you get to, everyone's responsible for what they do. You deserve to rot in hell if you do something bad. Why would you want to be anywhere closer to that on that spectrum? What if you strip all that away? I'm saying if you're still able to live a successful, happy life with all the things that you guys like to do, but without any of the dogma, without any of the good and bad, evil and sin or not sin, if you're able to strip all that out and it still works, why would you want any of that? Why would you want to be any closer to this heaven and hell camp than you need to be?
Because on the other side is a cold, unfeeling world of no emotion where nothing matters.
Mm-hmm.
As Ben was saying, the extreme of no free will is a dystopia of absolutely nothing matters. There's no point to life. We shouldn't even bother.
Yeah, I agree with all those things though.
So then,
You agree with him?
Yeah, I don't. I
Yeah,
think.
so-
I think.
so
I
you
think.
live
I
in a-
think. I think the life that
world.
I don't think
of-
so. No, I have lots of emotions. I have happiness. I have sadness, and they're all just part of a cycle of life that I'm just like, oh, that's great. It doesn't have to mean anything to me. The meaning is
Meaningless.
meaningless. That's right. I'd go with it again, and I'd say I don't actually think there needs to be meaning to have happiness and sadness, to have responsibility and lack of responsibility. Like there's almost like a little humility that comes in it, just being like, well, okay, it's all pretty pointless, right? Like we can do great things, and I can
Nihilism.
strive for great things.
And I think
yeah,
that's naive of you.
it might be.
To think of stuff like that. Like I can enrich my life by congratulating like someone for getting a massive part in a play. If they've gone through this entire process of auditioning and then right at the end they finally get the part, I go and see their opening show and then they knock it out of the park. Me like having the viewpoint of free will and not being like that was always like going to happen and like he didn't have any say in whether or not he was going to be there enriches my life in the fact of I gain so much more emotion from that moment. I think there's a difference in your like I don't want to like quantify emotions because I do think everyone has like different thresholds for their emotions. Like your happiest compared to my happiest is the same. Like we're both the happiest we've ever been. But like it could be a lot less if you were to take the exact same quantity of happy and put it into me. Do you understand what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense.
Are you saying it's relative based on the person?
Yeah, and being like
And you're saying your
having-
your relative maximum happiness is gonna be greater because you believe in free will. Is that what you're?
Yes,
Interesting. Yeah.
because
I don't see that.
because when I like go and do things, I gain that extra understanding of he did all these things because he made the choice to.
Do you think of yourself in the third person?
No, I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about
The person
Oh,
audition.
this other
Yeah.
person. Yeah.
Gotcha.
No.
To answer your question, Liam, I think that, like I said before, effectively, I think that we live our lives in very similar ways, despite having a very different active belief of free will.
Mm-hmm.
I think the core difference comes down to the fact that at the end of the day, I feel like I have more of a sense of self believing in free will.
That's something that I would like to get your opinion on in a moment, but the big difference that I've come to is the end that you pursue. I would like to know what that is. And what I mean by that is, if I had to put one word, I'd say fulfillment. And the thing is, I can't fathom fulfillment on the basis of no free will. On the basis of what you were talking about with this kind of on how the end of the no free will spectrum is that, cold, barren space. But even just in that range, if you've separated emotion and responsibility from this equation of from the timeline of events, where is the fulfillment? What I pursue is the end that I strive for is based in free will.
So I had a moment while you were talking with this that I realized something I need to add to be able to make this argument work that I think actually helps understand it. I think without any meaning at all, it's meaningless. I think you guys are correct about that. It doesn't really matter. I could stab you or not stab you. I don't think it really matters. I think at some level, and this is at least for me personally, I think the basis of everything is an arbitrary decision that I prefer humans to not suffer. And I think that's biologically baked in. I think, okay, maybe humans, evolution is just a biological process of going over time.
In order to preserve the species, you
exactly
should have compassion so that those around you don't feel isolated.
Exactly, and I think that's the basis of almost every decision I make, is that I just want humans to suffer less, and I want humans to do more. And I think that's like an emotional feeling. I think it goes with empathy. I think it goes with everything.
Mm-hmm.
I still see that as like a biological thing. I still see that as an arbitrary. It's not really arbitrary because it's decided by the fact that if I didn't have that, if everyone was psychopaths, I don't think we'd work well as humans. So it's just biologically it ended up that way. So I think that's the core of everything, and I still don't think it needs free will because I think it just comes from this idea that we're gonna live better as humans if we believe this way. And it happens to work with my emotions. I think emotions are a chemical process that are really helpful in this case because they align with almost everything in this case because they align with the fact that I want humans to do better, and my emotions are trying to point me in that direction, but I'm still able to recognize them as that.
Can I present a question to everyone?
I would love for you to present
Yes,
a question to everyone.
Why does free will have to be an overarching theme for everyone? Why can't Liam, since he believes in the fact that there is no free will, he doesn't have free will, and since I believe I do, I do. If he is living his life in a way in which, like, he believes there's no free will, why can't he just not have free will then? And I do.
I mean, what if you say you're a tree?
What?
You can.
No,
I just don't think it matters. You don't see that at all. Like,
no, I think he means like turning it on and off, like
Yeah.
Whether you choose to kind of resist or whether you're just kind of going with the flow of events.
I don't think I'm resisting anything.
Well, I think that's what he's saying. I
Yeah.
think he's saying you shut off your free will.
Yeah, I don't see how that could be. I mean, like, because I'm saying when I look through all my day-to-day life, I can make all the decisions you guys make, and I feel like I can logically defend there not being free will in any of it.
And this kind of goes back to the fulfillment aspect I was talking about, but also something that I thought about mentioning earlier, but it's like my understanding of free will, I do, because we've talked about it as this kind of overarching thing, but the general way that I treat it and I think about it is this kind of like a microcosm where it's like my free will, because it is hard to place it in the greater whole.
Yeah.
Is because like something I thought about mentioning earlier was Descartes' meditations with I think therefore I am. The easiest and the most fathomable and defendable position is on yourself. It's easiest to understand free will in reference to myself. It's hard once I put myself into the greater society. And that's where I like the fulfillment perspective, because fulfillment within oneself starts with oneself and bettering oneself. But as soon as you're placed into a greater whole, that grows. And then there's fulfillment within your community, within your social sphere. And you can better yourself, you can grow and interact with these people. But I think it starts from oneself. And that's where I have centered my concept of free will, is in that local entity that is me.
Sure. And I mean, I guess just to kind of summarize how I really feel about this, going back to just that spectrum or a continuum of like human thought, I think humans start thinking, working together, we start with the most pure kind of religions. It's just like, I mean, I'm not a historian. I don't know this, but I'm pretty sure the way it works is like we started pretty much like we worshiping fire or something like that, or worshiping God. Basically, this and as soon as we started thinking, I think we were very religious a while ago. Okay, let's simplify it. As humans have gone over time, I think we've become less religious. Is that true?
Yeah.
I think the more
I don't have enough information to validate that viewpoint. That's where I'm gonna stand on that, because like I think I do think that as humanity has gone on, there has like more religions have become mainstream through like the internet, like the sharing of knowledge and sharing of ideals through a more widespread net of. Originally, it was like the Silk Road. Not originally.
Dude,
like,
I love Silk Road.
My favorite internet.
Yeah.
like knowledge was passed through the Silk Road, and that's how religion was spread across Asia. So I do think as humanity has gone on, I think religions have almost homogenized with each other. So it used to be like, oh, this country is this religion, where that can still be the point, that can still be the case in some places, like this town is like this predominantly this religion, or America as a whole is predominantly this religion. But I think the ability of people to move and the sharing of knowledge and ideals through the internet since it came about has homogenized religions to the point of where like one place isn't.
Can I just finish my point? 'Cause that's
Sorry.
completely off
That's,
topic.
yeah.
My point really was just that to me it seems though the more intellectual we become, and populations that are more intellectual deviate from religion more. That appears to be a general trend that I've found.
That is something that I am not necessarily able to agree with, because there is the curious thing where throughout the 20th century is a major one I'm calling to. I don't know specifically the prevalence of it today, but many major scientists have gone into religion later in life. Einstein, for example. They become religious towards the end of their careers and lives. And whether this is just, some search for eternity, or if there is something in their research, and obviously, but I think I think I saw something where the scientific community is actually rather 50-50 on whether they're religious or not. Which I think people don't expect.
But I wonder, does he go to religion and he says, okay, actually, I do believe in God? Or is he going to religion because he says, okay, I think this is a useful way to live? So I think there's a big distinction there. What I'm trying to say is, if you go all the way intellectual, I think you can get to this point of like, yeah, free will doesn't make sense. God doesn't really, like, there's things that don't really make sense, but I can see their utility. So that's why like I feel like I know a lot of people even at this school that are like really critical of religion. There's like a lot of people that'll say like religion is completely stupid and useless. It just creates division. It just creates hate. And I would argue that's not true. I think that if you look at it through the right lens of it unifying people, and I think bringing people together, giving people a common basis, and giving people answers to things, I think it can be extremely helpful.
Totally.
But I still try to look at it from this realm of I can logically go through and say, I can't logically find a path to it, but that doesn't make it necessarily wrong. Or I can logically see how it could be helpful, even though it's an illogical basis. I'm just trying to make the point generally that I think if you go super far on the logic scale, I don't know how you can still have the same belief in God, for example. Because I feel like if you're really going with the pure science, I just want to figure anything out, I don't think you can figure anything out in religion.
Well, I'm having a problem with you constantly trying to like qualify like, oh, on this scale from religion to logic or whatever you're doing. I'm having a problem with you putting stuff down on a scale, on paper.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you do that, it's lost something. It's lost some meaning. You're now assigning it a value, which could be correct. It could be the proper place for it on this scale. But the act of putting it on the scale is taking away a quality of it. But
that's everything we do. Anytime you put anything on a scale, you're taking away the full picture. You're just saying, okay, we're going to take some aspect of it, we're going to put it on a scale.
Yeah, but you're still losing an aspect.
Yeah, but I'm trying to make the argument that we're not losing an essential aspect that makes putting on a scale useless. I'm trying to say that, okay, if you put it on a scale, maybe there are conclusions we can draw from it, or we can help guide us in the right direction.
let's say-
I'm not saying I'm encapsulating everything about every religion and way of thinking by putting it on a linear scale.
No,
Of
I
course
think-
not.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make
Yeah.
a counter argument to
Sure.
like putting stuff on a scale loses like an essential quality. If I'm just gonna do like shapes and like boxes. Say you have
like
three
shapes.
boxes. Say you have 3 boxes. One has 5 pyramids, one has 5 cubes, and one has 5 circles. And you,
Are we in 3D?
yes, we're in
Cylinders? Spheres? I don't know what a circle
sphere,
is.
sorry.
Thanks.
And then on the scale, you say, okay, all of these things have 5 shapes. And then you ask the question, which one has the most shape? Like, which one has the most, like, volume within it? By putting it on the scale of shapes, by putting it on the scale of religion to logic, you've lost the aspect of which one has the most volume in it. It's gonna go triangles, then spheres, then cubes, because that's the
Wait,
volume.
weren't there pyramids?
Yeah, sorry,
Oh,
pyramids.
my bad. No, you're good.
It's gonna go pyramids.
Not the point.
It's gonna go pyramids to spheres to cubes.
Okay.
Be-
Yeah, sure.
But by putting it on the scale of number of shapes, you've lost an essential quality that you need for a different question.
Right, but I'm not asking a different question. I'm asking a very specific question, so I'm trying to make a scale that fits that question.
But I think what Finian's saying is that
Yeah.
what you've lost is the answer.
Yeah.
Okay, then describe it. What have I lost?
I don't know because you put it on the scale.
Well, what is missing from my scale? If you can't tell
the
me, then we
entire
can't
picture.
Yeah, but then we can't have a conversation on it if you can't describe what we're lacking from the conversation. Like
You're
don't
missing.
know
you're
what
just
you
saying,
don't
you're just saying,
know.
okay, you're oversimplifying. Okay,
It's the whole thing
to
of like,
do
oh, you
to
don't
do
know
almost
what you
any
lost.
thinking, I feel like we have to simplify it to some extent. I'm saying, okay, we make this simplification. Tell me what's wrong with it, and let's try to improve it.
It's oversimplified.
In what way?
You are so when we talk about religion, when I say religion, it is the simplification of the entirety of like every single human interaction in a church, a mosque, a synagogue, down into the word religion. Whatever that might be per person, that is what happens when I say religion and it conjures up an image in your mind.
Well, what if I actually define what I mean when I mean this scale? I'm talking about logic versus belief.
Okay.
From that, if I were to, right, I should have defined that better. If I were to
Okay.
define it as logic and belief,
Mm-hmm.
now I can put everything on that scale. Can I not?
No.
Why not? I mean,
Where-
I might not know.
where does-
I'm guessing on a lot
Where
of
does blue set on the scale from logic to
100%
belief?
What about
logic.
when logic and belief aren't on ends?
Yeah, like, but I'm colorblind. My blue is
No,
different
I-
from your blue.
I'd
That's my
I'd
main
argue you
critique
can
is
do that.
when are logic and belief, because there are times when they are not counterintuitive. Like they align.
Give an
What
example.
about those moments? Well, there are moments where people, like, and I'm not talking about every religious belief, but there are times when things happen and maybe a belief in something slightly mystical is the logical answer.
It is logical
on the
for someone to
circumstances.
find solace in religion when a tragedy happens. Like it's logical for someone
That's a better example.
if something horrible happens in their life, it is logical for them to go and seek help, whatever that might be, and that might be in religion or
Sure.
in belief. So having those two things on two different sides of this scale reduces it too much.
But you really don't think, for the sake of this conversation, we could make a scale that says it rains because of water and the whole physical
Water
process,
cycle,
or it rains
yeah.
because God is mad. You don't like just
No,
for
you
just for the
can't
sake
put-
of just for the sake of an argument. Do you think we can do that?
Yes.
Like I don't
but you
like
have
what
to
I'm
be
understanding.
very careful
Right,
about what you're putting on the scale.
I'm
Because-
just arguing. I just feel like
I think we're caught up in
your point of
semantics.
contention. Yeah, your point. It starts to feel like semantics. It feels like, okay, you're right. No model is perfect. Gravity isn't perfect. No model is perfect. But can we use this model just because it
Scale's
might be
just
helpful for this
pure
conversation?
rationale versus zealotry. I think that's what he's just trying to get at.
Yeah, basically.
Like,
yeah. Can we if we were to do that,
In like
would you give me the concession of making a scale that can do that for the sake of an argument? Or is that too much?
that's too much.
Okay.
No, because if we're
love this
going
so
to talk about these extremely deep concepts
Sure.
like free will, we can't oversimplify them, even if it's for a
You
metaphor.
always can. You can, just for making a specific point about anything, you can make as much simplification as necessary.
I think he's just trying to say they're bad assumptions.
Then you can take a look at the overall point and say, okay, were there too many simplifications made to get here? And then I think it's even more helpful to say, what were the simplifications? How can we make the model better? All I'm hearing is that it's not a perfect model. I'm aware of that. I'm just saying, for right now, for making this point, I think it's a useful model. And if you can't find specific ways that it isn't, then what use is it to just continue to say, well, it's not a perfect model? Like, what's the actual? Is there any utility to this point, or is it just being contrarian? No, I understand it's coming from. I understand the idea you're coming from. I just don't really see how it's.
The point for me is to say, if we're going to be talking about these things that need exact specifics, like is there or is there not free will? If we are going to start reducing things, it will lose aspects of it that we won't be able to find out until it's too late.
Then how can we talk about it?
I actually want to defend.
We're trying to.
I want to defend Liam here.
Okay.
I think he was laying out a scale for a very specific subset of a point. I have no problem with it. That's kind of my take.
Well, and I don't like if I can't do that, then how can we begin to have a logical conversation?
Yeah,
if you're stuck on the point of we can't totally encapsulate this conversation, so we shouldn't touch it.
No,
then why
I'm
even have
not
this
saying
conversation?
that you shouldn't touch on it. I'm saying that you have to understand that when you do simplify it, you are losing an aspect to it.
Great, I agree. Yeah, every model is imperfect. There's no perfect model. I have that understanding.
And you have to acknowledge the fact that after you do that, whatever conclusion you draw from the scale that you've put down, you have to say that there is this other point that is still valid.
And you can't tell me what that point is.
Liam's crafting the ideal gas law of free will right here. I think that's what we're getting at.
I can't tell you right now because it's a general proclamation. Like,
Right.
if you give me an example, then I'll be able to be like, oh, but you can't say that this isn't true, given your example. You can't say with absolute certainty that your counterexample isn't.
Let's just
Isn't
go to the
valid.
example for a second. Brendan, you put it. I put it as logical versus belief. You put it a different way. Like
I just thought it was slightly better wording.
yeah, no, what was it? I liked it.
Oh,
I
it
just
was
can't remember.
pure rationale to zealotry.
Rational
Yeah.
zealotry. That's great. Let's just stick with that just for a minute.
We've refined
So
the
let's-
scale.
Rationale and zealotry. Where is doing everything in your life to please God in that scale? Can we put that
It's like
closer
I
to
don't know.
zealotry?
Yeah, well, it's like probably a 0.8.
If we're doing from 0 to 1, this is a normalized scale.
No, negative
0 to
1 to 1.
I like
Was-
negative 1
Yeah,
to 1.
Negative?
Yeah, if we're doing
Yeah.
a normal scale.
Oh.
Yeah, zero's in the middle.
Okay. Oh, sure. My bad. Yeah. Totally.
Let's go to 0 to 10 though. That's people like that.
Wait,
scale.
what happened to the negative?
Whoa.
Negative 10 to 10?
Well,
I think it's just an easier scale that for people to
Okay.
understand is 5 is average.
Alright,
50, I think
alright,
right like
what's
that's
in the middle? Like, what's
5.
on each side?
okay. So yeah,
Sorry, not
you have
zealotry.
on one side you have zealotry, which is like everything
That
is
can be 10.
everything's
That can
in
be 10.
pursuit of
I'm
pleasing
looking
God.
for numbers.
Sounds good. Everything is in pursuit of pleasing God. That's 10, and 0 is everything is just logical.
Mm-hmm.
I have and,
Scientific, logical? Like
yeah,
okay.
scientific, logical. There's no free will. Everything is just coming from a series of events.
Okay.
I think you could even say on this side, you can logically say you can state what you know and you don't know. I don't know that there's no God. I can't come up with a logical argument
And
for there being God, but I also can't prove there isn't.
yeah, which means that the absolute zealotry point could be logical. If there is a God, it makes total sense to cater everything towards them.
Right, but my point is everything else we do in logic points us away from God, in my opinion. Because there's no like everything we can figure out. Like there's a reason that we think we know how rain works. There's like tons of reasons. Like we have a bunch of science. We have a bunch of models we've come up with. I'm saying that is on the opposite side of the scale from believing God. I think to be able to put that on a side of a scale that's a 0 or 1 and say that a 9 or a 10 is on the other side and that's believing in God,
But I
think that's useful for this model.
I can take that example and say all of those factors are controlled by some otherworldly being.
So when I say rain is determined by a bunch of scientific stuff, and I put that as a 0, 1, and I put rain is because God's unhappy, and I put that as a 9 or 10. Can you, let's say this is an SAT question. Can you, in your mind, can you think about what the rule might be that I'm using to put those there?
Yes, I totally can understand.
That's all that's needed for this. That's all that's needed. Because sure.
Yeah, I think the problem is that you guys disagree with what the definition of logical is, because you're coming from the perspective that logical is like scientific, following the rules of logic, and Finian is saying it is logical to be religious. That's where you guys are disagreeing, right?
Yeah, but I'm
saying
that's
that
why
as
I'm
a
saying if we redefine it, I think we can say that I'm not even going to tell you what the rule is.
No,
I think you can just guess based on where I'm putting it 0 and 1 and what I'm putting at 10. I think you can guess what a rule is.
I don't think you're using the scale right.
You don't think so?
I think it should be
You're doing
-5
science
and 5.
versus religion.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't think you're doing rationale versus
You've lost an
zealotry.
aspect of putting it on a scale.
That's the thing I would say.
Okay.
The way you're treating the scale is science versus religion. You're not doing rationale versus zealotry.
Would you give me a 0 and a 10 for rationale and zealotry?
Well, I would say rationale is the cold, unfeeling calculation, and zealotry is pure belief in spite of facts that might point otherwise.
Can you put can you put rain comes from a physical process?
I don't know if you guys have watched
makes
Monty
rain.
Python.
Yeah.
But there's the whole thing where, if you throw the witch in the lake and she sinks, she's not a witch, but if she floats, she's a witch because she's made of wood.
Yeah.
Right. So she
That doesn't
dies
make
either way.
sense. In spite of evidence, that doesn't make sense. I would put that
And
towards
whole
the
scale of,
zealotry end.
Sure. She's lighter
But-
than a duck or something.
I just don't think you're using the scale right. Is all I was really getting
So
at.
you're losing an
could you put-
aspect by putting
Could you
it on
put
a scale.
the items that I had on the scale?
So,
Or could you?
yes, yes.
Brendan, do you understand?
Okay.
Do you understand the idea I'm
So
trying
scale.
to encapsulate?
I like
Could you
negative 1 to 1, so I'm going to use negative 1
Okay,
to
we'll
1.
use negative 1 to 1.
So,
Oh my goodness.
I would put your two things at I would
Maybe-
put them
how
on
about this?
opposite ends of 0.
Would you come
But-
up with your negative 1 and your 1 for this? I mean, I think you were doing that a second ago.
Yeah, no,
I don't really
I'm
care
doing
what they
rationale
are.
and zealotry. I'm
Okay.
doing faith in spite of everything,
Right.
and then pure calculation in spite of belief.
Great.
Okay.
That's wonderful. Okay, let's go with that.
And I would say that, yeah, I would put both of them at maybe negative 0.5 and 0.5.
Great.
Yes,
Well,
they
we
are.
won't
They
even
are on
define
other
the
ends.
extremes,
They are
yeah.
on other ends because evidence points one way, but I believe the rain god is mad, or evidence. Science suggests that it's raining because of condensation in the atmosphere. But no. That's the 2 points that I would use for the scale. Is I would say it's one in spite of the other are the 2 ends.
Okay.
How did we get from free will to talking about?
Oh,
Stream of
I'm about to show you
consciousness is
actually.
what we were looking for.
Yeah.
I think I'm taking the extreme on one side of that scale. I think I'm just trying to look at it. I'm basically saying, okay, how far to the just doing things or believing things based on the best understanding we know about the world and mechanics and philosophy, our best understanding of everything in logic, if we take it to that as much as possible, I feel like that ultimately ends up being very similar to my argument. And what I'm just trying to argue is that any addition of free will, adding some point of contention in that, some point of there's complete logic, but living as though we're a little farther on that scale to the zealotry. I think is what it is. I think it's just farther. I think it's farther from the absolute logic. And I'm just trying to make the argument that living in the absolute logic side can encapsulate most of the ideas in the rest of the scale if you just have the right idea about them.
I would say that yes, you place yourself at point one with the downsides that comes with.
Point one.
Because I mean -1. You're at -1.
We could just use 0 to 10.
Whatever. Okay,
That's not
you're
changing
at
it
Yeah,
again.
yeah, sure.
No, we need another scale.
No,
Let's go
-1,
-5 to
-1.
All right,
no,
the
okay.
log of
No, but you're.
Okay,
But
-1. No.
you place yourself at that far end
Sure.
in spite of the other, and that's the thing that I'm trying to say is that neither end is perfect.
Sure.
One is in spite of fact, and the other one is in spite of belief, in spite of what you know. And I choose to place myself somewhere slightly positive
Okay.
because I just think that like the beauties of life, the wondrous things that we have, these fantastic interactions, opportunities, the choices we've made, the horrible things we've done should be due to some belief. There's, and I kind of said earlier, the human element. I think that there's this human element that just I don't equate to science. That I don't involve in science. I don't try to put them together. These are separate spheres. And in spite of, the evidence that we are probably some cold calculating box of chemicals, there is something kind of wondrous and beautiful going on. And I will choose to cherish that. And that's just where I've placed myself. I think that's
Sure.
what I've garnered from this is that it's like at the end of the day, we're all kind of, on similar trajectories. We're doing stuff. We can interact in similar ways. It's just where you've chosen to put yourself on the scale, which way you're kind of facing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would just go back. I don't see any reason to think that going any farther on that scale would add any more clarity in life.
Yeah.
I just don't see I just think you have to make up more arbitrary stuff to get farther from where I am on the scale.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the point of the scale.
You're basically you're just deciding, you're just like,
yes,
you're going away from the logical. I think if you can logically,
that's human.
well, I mean,
That's
I don't know.
my take.
Thank you so much for being with us, Brendan.
Yeah, I think
this has been a
it's time to,
fantastic
yeah.
conversation.
I absolutely had a blast, especially listening to Liam and Finian argue about.
Hey, you've been dying over there.
Yeah.
Dude, me and Brendan were like looking at each other like this is amazing. It's just like so arbitrary.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. In
Yeah, it was such
general,
a meaningless tangent.
Yeah, it was such a
It was.
But anyway, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank
this
you.
was
It
a great
conversation.
perspective to add into the Beyond Me 3-person mix.
Yeah.
Because you just brought a very unique take to the discussion.
Appreciate
Thank you.
that.
It was fun to kind of do this formally because it's always been kind of sporadic, these
Yeah,
discussions.
yeah.
So it's good to have it now immortalized in
Absolutely.
media.
Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ben.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Appreciate that.